Hey there, and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Tuesday, December 8th, 2020. Happy birthday, sister. I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson, and joining me this week is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Hey, that's me.
That's Trevor. Like I mentioned, it is my sister's birthday. She's 26 years old now. Time is a fucking bastard. Trevor, we are not talking about that, unfortunately, though, or any other birthdays. We're talking about some big shakeups in the video game industry here. Trevor quickly added a second one here. First off, we'll go to Naughty Dog. Fresh, I still say fresh, off the release of The Last of Us Part 2 earlier this year. Naughty Dog officially had some promotions in store. I would say the one kind of getting most of the buzz is the fact that Neil Druckmann is now officially co-president of Naughty Dog alongside Evan Wells. There were two other promotions to vice presidential roles at Naughty Dog, partially to make up for Neil no longer being a VP. I thought this was a really interesting decision. Friend of the show, Logan Moore, had I think a few tweets about this that I also kind of thought were good. What do you think Neil being made co-president of Naughty Dog means both for the studio's short and long term, and in particular for the creative side of things over at Naughty Dog?
Yeah, sure. First, before we dive into that, I do want to give a shout out to Allison Maury and Christian Geerling, who are probably getting lost in the shuffle, but they're the ones who have been promoted as vice presidents. Allison, formerly director of operations, and Christian, formerly the co-director of programming. They've also been elevated in their roles. My thoughts, like when I saw this initially, I was like, I mean, that doesn't surprise me, given what a figurehead of the company Neil has been since Uncharted 2, essentially, since definitely Uncharted 3 and Last of Us. Basically, were easily like him and Bruce, kind of were his things. But that has led me down the rabbit hole of who leads the future products, and what are the projects that Naughty Dog is working on these days, since we haven't heard anything post Last of Us Part 2.
Sure.
And the studio for the last two generations has pretty much been, at least in mindshare, has been Amy Hennig or Neil Druckmann and Bruce Straley, and then when Bruce stepped away, Neil. So if Neil's taking on this role as co-president of the organization alongside Evan Wells, how does that affect his day-to-day? It's just a title bump and he's still basically going to be a creative director sitting, because the thing he seems to really find his passion in, it seems to have been in the last generation or two, being there in the motion capture studio, working with the actors, directing the projects. That's what we see, at least, obviously, and that's a visually interesting thing to kind of showcase and put out there in photos and stuff. But yeah, that. So I don't know, who has been kind of working up the ranks there at Naughty Dog that could take on the next big projects, or what those next big projects could be. They've been so much about Uncharted and Last of Us for so long that it's hard to, think about what's next until they really kind of come out there and show us what's next. So yeah, that's my biggest kind of takeaway from this is I've just been assuming that Neil was going to be, taking some time to recharge after Last of Us Part 2, and then he was going to hit the ground running on their next big project or something like that. But that might not be the case. So I'm very curious towards the future of this. On a broader sense, I'm, I guess, concerned about what Neil as a head of the company means for Naughty Dog. Neil in a much more prominent head of the company, obviously as creative director, creative lead on The Last of Us Part 2. He was basically the head of the project. But since he, by most accounts, seems to be not he seems to push himself into crunch culture land. The fact that he is now like at that point of power, unless somebody really comes in and reins him in, I'm worried that Naughty Dog's just going to become more and more of a crunch culture studio than it already is, because that kind of mentality coming from the top down is never good, is never healthy. So that's like my kind of short-term and long-term, I think, concerns for the studio are I don't know what their next projects look like, and I don't know how they move away from their reputation as crunch culture with Neil in a co-president position with the organization.
It's interesting for me, obviously, as such a big kind of fan, advocate, proponent of like Naughty Dog and Naughty Dog's games for, I mean, at least for the last 2 generations, but really, I mean, I'll champion Jack and Dexter all day long, baby.
Jack and Dex.
But it's interesting for me, this news when it broke actually caught me off guard quite a bit, to see someone like Neil kind of take on that co-president title. And then the more I've thought about it and more reflected on it, I actually think this is kind of the moment to do something like this. You actually hit on something for me, which is after the last 2 generations that have been so kind of entwined with Uncharted and The Last of Us, this is the point where I think both of these series are kind of over. Like, certainly in like Naughty Dog, at the very least, has let go of Uncharted, and I don't think they're going to go back. And I think they're more than happy to let go of The Last of Us, even more so because by everything kind of it seems like we've read and seen, they didn't necessarily want to do the second one, and then kind of had to maybe be talked into that. And so this is a real moment, I think, for the first time since the mid-2000s when they kind of made that jump from Jack to Uncharted, where Naughty Dog is doing something, or I guess, but even Last of Us Part 1 didn't count because they were still doing Uncharted games. So yeah, the first time in, 13 years where they don't have something they kind of have to follow up and match, and they can actually just do a different thing. And so in that vein, moving Neil up to this co-president role and maybe somewhat allowing for him to kind of shepherd this new generation of Naughty Dog creative talent to kind of take over the reins, right? Like, I imagine, like you, that whatever Naughty Dog's next game is, Neil Druckmann is still the creative director, but I would not be shocked if he is like co-creative director or co-director along with someone else, and then after that game he kind of maybe passes it off a bit more, or maybe he doesn't, right? Maybe this is a situation like Kojima, or like Cory Barlog, where he is just like a guy who is just essentially in charge of the studio and also the creative director, and probably has, in this case, Evan Wells take care of some of the more games of running a giant studio. But I think it actually isn't, and I can't remember her name, but I think it's like Haley Gross or something, who is one of the key writers and creative talents on The Last of Us Part 2, and I could see her kind of being shepherded on to take on a bigger role for whatever their next thing might be, or just anyone. That studio is not bereft of talent.
Yeah, Haley Gross, like I thought about that. Haley Gross came to Naughty Dog after working on Westworld, I believe, as a writer. So she has a background in writing. I don't know necessarily if she is or was looking to become more of a video game kind of person, or if this was, an interesting writing project for her. I don't know if she's still at Naughty Dog or is she's working on other things, or if that was like that the project is done and now she's moving on to her next writing opportunities. So yeah, I don't know what her status is, but yeah, she would be, I guess, the other name since Bruce left that people can easily point to. And obviously, this is also something that has come up in some of the other stories in this last week, is like, obviously studios are much more than these, few people.
Yes.
But you still can't take away the impact of the people that are that much behind the story, be it the director or the writers. Like, for a studio like Naughty Dog that is so like prominently features its story and its narrative. Like that you can't have those without the other. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
I also think it's interesting because, and it was one of the first things I thought about, especially with the news of The Last of Us HBO series, as well as I wonder, again, kind of in some mindset, if this isn't a moment for Neil to kind of take that co-president's role and, again, also allow him to kind of do other projects as he kind of bounces back and forth. Like, Neil's going to be one of the writers for the HBO series, and, you know, no matter how talented, no matter how little sleep you get and just crunch constantly, there's only so many hours in the day to write on an HBO kind of what seems to be like a pretty big potential promise in HBO series and make a video game, right? These are both big projects that require a lot of your time. And so I think it's maybe a reflection of the fact that Neil, maybe more than anyone in the video game industry other than like Kojima, I could just see being like, I want to make a movie or I want to do a TV show. Like I want to do these kind of creative pursuits outside of games as well. And so I wonder if this isn't a way for him to kind of try to help out on the next game again, and then also dabble his hand in whether it's television or if he has a screenplay locked in a drawer somewhere, try to flesh that out as well. And again, allow him to kind of take a step back maybe from being directly in the trenches and allow him to kind of oversee things more. And then if he doesn't like the direction of how the game's next story is going out, he can come in and give his hands-on role, but pass it off to a Haley Gross or anyone else at that studio, right? Like, I think this, especially because it came relatively recently after the HBO kind of has been releasing more and more news about the Last of Us television series.
Plus, the Uncharted film seems to actually,
and that's
like have wrapped filming already, I guess.
Yeah, and so that's the thing too, is that like I think Neil, I would not be shocked if he does more stuff outside of games in this coming, video game generation. And so this is a way for him to kind of do that and not be as tied into the weeds of it. And I also think for Naughty Dog itself, it's a little bit of a reflection of the reality that's already been there, right? Like you kind of touched on, Neil Druckmann has been one of the two faces of Naughty Dog unquestionably since, 2013 for sure with The Last of Us, but arguably 2011. And pretty much the sole face of the studio since Bruce left. And so it's kind of a reflection of the reality of just like how important his role is at that studio and how much of a face he is. And I think how respected he is, and also how much turnover there is at Naughty Dog because of that crunch culture and because of just, this is a studio that is so marquee that I feel like people, they come here for a few years, work on the game, and then leave to go do their own thing and probably sleep a little bit. And so it's also a reflection of the fact that he's also one of the most long-tenured people at Naughty Dog as well at that studio, right? Like, there aren't a lot of Crash Bandicoot and Jak and Daxter veterans still here. There probably aren't even that many veterans still of, like, Uncharted 1 and 2, and so he would be one of the most senior, like, tenured guys here, and so in that vein, it makes sense as well.
I did look at their About Us kind of careers page, and they've got seemingly about 40 positions open over at Naughty Dog. So a lot of them are temp positions, so probably working on the Last of Us multiplayer suite, whatever that's going to end up turning into. But then there are like a handful of like game team assignments that are out there. So, they're probably at least in the early phases, if not, part way through development of their next title.
Yeah. And that's the thing, too, is that you touched on it, and I think I have to circle back to it again, is that, like, what this means for crunch at Naughty Dog is a really interesting one for me. I mean, Neil, to me, has always struck me as someone who is like this artist fully committed to what he does and just gives himself, like, completely over to the project. I'm hopeful, as I'm sure you are, that him being in this position of leadership, and I think, the gradual awakening and education over the past few years of the toxic consequences of crunch, and the fact that Neil Druckmann is not the same person that he was in 2011, right? Like, he's 9 years older. Crunch probably feels different, and so this naturally feel different for him than it did 9 years ago, make me think that maybe he'll have kind of, now that he's in his position, lay down some rules and lay down some sort of guidelines, even more so because this comes in the wake of the piece about Hades and its culture,
That's what I was just pulling up to add into Shoutouts.
Perfect, yeah. I also thought about adding it. And like, I think, I don't think there's any shame for Neil to have said, for years, I championed working really hard and having sleepless nights and working 20-hour days and doing this kind of stuff because I thought that it made the project better. And now, after talking to more and more of my peers and talking to more and more people in the industry, I recognize that the negative repercussions of this, and I felt the negative repercussions of this, right? And like, I don't necessarily know if I think it's likely or probable by any means, but I do think there is a chance that maybe now he can kind of say like, yeah, like I've learned and I've grown and I can recognize that, crunch not only isn't the only way to make games, but isn't the best way to make games either, no matter how big they are. And so that's what I'm optimistic and hopeful for. Is it going to happen? Maybe, maybe not. But Neil Druckmann's a smart guy, and he seems like a good dude. And he's friends with a lot of people in the industry who talk about crunch a lot. And so, maybe one of them can sit him down for a drink and say, we don't need to do this, right? Like, you don't need to break yourselves like this. And there's some part of me that thinks that, like, they took so long with The Last of Us Part 2 and Uncharted 4 that, like, maybe they understand that, like, you can just take your time and make these games over 4 years and have 2 games come out in the console generation, and nobody's going to be upset if they're both fantastic. And so just take your time. Don't try to rush everything. Neil Druckmann, again, is a smart dude. I think he understands these arguments inherently, and I'd like to think that he'll bring some sort of change to how Naughty Dog works as well.
Yeah, I don't think the issue though is so much like, oh, it took 4 years to make those games or whatever. It was that it was like it took 4 years to make those games, and all 4 years of those were crunch years. Kind of was the concern.
Yeah.
And so if you step away, like the conversation that is coming up, but be it in Cyberpunk or with kind of as we touched on the kind of the opposite end of the spectrum of Supergiant and how they've been approaching it is, like Rami Ishmael kind of like tweeted out the other day that I retweeted, the stuff that I've been spouting for years is like crunch is a failure of project management.
Yep. And
like more than ever with Cyberpunk coming out as a buggy mess by all accounts, I just like anybody who is a creative director for a studio or a project should like have mandatory project management training, if not certification, like because like there are ways to account for that stuff that take into account like giving your people time off and all that stuff, and for too long it's been like a very just the industry exploits people's passion to work on this stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's like Neil being passionate to pour 18-hour workdays into the project. Not healthy, not great, but like you can't always police somebody's choices. The one of the things, kind of jumping ahead to the shoutouts on the Supergiant thing, is the idea that they've instilled things in their culture to limit how that spreads to other people. Like somebody touches on the idea like, hey, we don't want emails being sent out after 5 on a Friday. If you get excited about a thing, you can go ahead and work on that thing, but don't send out that email that's going to inadvertently bring somebody else and suck somebody else into your, ecosystem there. So putting those kinds of like safeguards in place helps limit how far that spreads. And again, going back to if Neil is one of those kinds of guys, just like Hauser over at Rockstar, who bragged about, working 100-hour weeks writing GTA 5 or Red Dead Redemption 2 or whatever it was. Red Dead Redemption 2 is what it was. Yeah. Like when that comes from the top down, everybody else at the studio is looking up at that guy and being like, well, if I don't do that, I'm going to they're going to hold my feet to the fire.
Yeah.
Be it implicitly or explicitly. Like, so if Neil is still out there being that 12, 18-hour a day kind of guy, that's not going to bode well for the mental health of everybody else beneath him.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. And I think the Supergiant one is such a good is a good counter to everyone, whether it's Cyberpunk or, Dan Houser, who spent 100 hours writing the story of Red Dead Redemption 2, and then just put all of that into the game and didn't trim anything because the game's too long and the story's too long. But because of how you can't ding really any Supergiant game for its lack of quality, right? Like, they achieved these incredible games that didn't require them to sacrifice everything. And again, like you said, I would argue there are relatively simple safeguards you can put in place to prevent crunch. Like, it's not, like, again, we're just two knuckleheads on the internet, surely, but, you know, not sending emails after 5 p.m. on a Friday seems like something that does make sense as a rule. Like, not doing certain things, having mandatory, like, time off that you have to take is another thing that is just, like, again, seems pretty simple to just institute at your, in your company to make its work-life culture better, right? And, like, I don't know how many times we have to, like, talk about the fact that, like, if your employees are happier, they're more productive, and if they're healthier, they're more productive before, you know, somebody will actually listen to us. But nonetheless, the industry as a whole doesn't seem to do that. And this is across the industry, too, right? Like, exploiting people's passion to, you know, make them work harder is something that is not just endemic to the studio side of things. Again, Alana Pierce had a, like, Twitter thread as well about, like, not taking, I think, a, like, single day off for, like, 3 or 4 weeks in a row at IGN.
6 weeks, I think. 6 or 8 weeks.
Yeah, and so,
she's touched on that a lot of times.
Yeah, and so it's not just on the studio side of things. Again, like, crunch culture, and that, to me, is also one of the bigger elements of the crunch conversation that I think is the least talked about side, is that, like, people taking advantage of other people's passion is very much all over the place in terms of the press and side of things, right? Whether it is, we're going to pay you $45,000 a year to live in the most expensive place in the country, and we know that if you won't do it, someone will because they love the job, they want the job, right? Mm-hmm. To, you know, making you work long hours, to giving you these giant tasks in a row where you just don't take a single day off for 6 weeks in a row. Like, this is, and, you know, to be fair to IGN, Miranda Sanchez kind of had a follow-up tweet which talked about how, like, the changes she's tried to make to the guides team in particular, to make sure that that's not the case anymore. But, you know, it is still all over the place in the video game industry on both the studio and the press side of things.
Yeah, I mean, we've touched on before the fact that, like, those companies aren't providing the consoles and the equipment you need to do your job of playing the games or whatever. But let alone the fact that, again, the thing obviously that came out this week is Cyberpunk. People had like 5 days to from when they got that game to when embargo hit, and those are, like, the hours that people are putting into those are largely done outside of your 9 to 5 portion, and people are almost never paid for the amount of time they're putting into playing the game for review. They're getting paid for the time they're spending in the office writing the review or whatever the case may be. I mean, so to put, you know, 80 hours into or 30 or 40 hours, let's say, over the course of 5 days into a Cyberpunk review to just play the game, let alone the time then to write and edit the review after the fact. Like, that's a full work week, but I guarantee pretty much anybody that was doing that was also checking in on meetings and doing other things at their respective positions. So, it is both sides of the industry are long known for kind of this issue, and it's not great.
But not to labor too much on the point. Again, congrats to all the promotions at Naughty Dog. Hopefully we see more change and more exciting things from that studio. But the other one, Trevor reminded me, because it felt like it had happened approximately 5 months ago, and that is over...
Yeah, it happened like after last week's show, and it was like one of the first things was like, hey, I'm putting this in there because this is big news. This is probably going to be like, you know, the lead story for next week's show, and then just it has been a week again.
Yeah,
all of the things we've already touched on, you know, tangentially in this episode, kind of like dominated the conversation in the days since.
But yeah, BioWare also had some big departures. Trevor, you're more familiar than BioWare than certainly I am, so these mean more to you than they mean to me. So what happened at BioWare?
Yeah, so basically, like, in tandem, Casey Hudson and Mark Darrah posted, like, hey, we're leaving the company, or, like, I'm leaving the company things, and they basically came out almost, you know, verbatim links at the same time alongside like a studio head, like, wishing them well kind of departure.
Mark Darrah came back and clapped at some people too on Twitter.
Yeah. So Casey Hudson, for those that aren't, as versed in the BioWare kind of ecosystem, is very much one of the names behind the Mass Effect series, and Mark Darrah is one of the names behind the Dragon Age series. And so obviously with a future Mass Effect planned, as well as the Legendary collection coming out early next year, Casey Hudson's departure is going to probably shake things up on that front, and then Dragon Age 4, that has been in the works for a long time now, is probably going to be shaken up as a result of Mark Darrah leaving. Casey Hudson, I believe, had left before and then came back. Specifically, like, it was celebrated that he was coming back because I don't think he worked on Andromeda, and I think that was one of the people looked at Casey Hudson coming back to the studio as a hey, maybe this will resolve some of the issues that Mass Effect has had kind of in that time since. So yeah, the sudden abrupt nature of these two big names leaving would be, effectively like if Neil had left at the same time Bruce left of Naughty Dog kind of thing. Yeah. And it would have just been like, okay, well, what does the future of that studio? So with BioWare, it is, what does the future of BioWare look like with those two people who have, spearheaded arguably their largest franchises, leaving the organization very suddenly, very abruptly. And yeah, as you touched on, like the voice actor Greg Ellis, I want to say, for he's a voice actor on Dragon Age for the roles of Cullen and Anders, notably. Seems to be very much like a MAGA kind of guy, and was out there like praising and like shouting to the rooftops, like, good, Mark Darrah is, a traitorous kind of disloyal, one of the most disloyal people that I've ever worked with. And Mark Darrah clapped back and was like, I don't know what you're trying to achieve here, man. But like, this isn't the way to go about it. So yeah, it was I didn't dive too deep into the weeds because like I immediately I looked at that guy's profile and saw he was like retweeting conspiracy things. I was just like, nope. Bouncing quickly away from that guy. So yeah, it'll be interesting to like the big thing is, what does this mean for the future of BioWare?
Yeah,
and again, like as we just spent a bunch of time talking about with Naughty Dog, obviously there are other people working at the studio, and they tried to kind of reassure, like, these are the people who are now the figureheads of this. But when these names are so ingrained with the series that they are attached to, we are in the pretty much the same state as Amy Hennig abruptly leaving Naughty Dog when that happened.
Yeah, that's a great comparison.
Like, okay, well, what does this mean for the future of Uncharted? And in that case, Neil and Bruce kind of stepped in for Uncharted 4. I think I said Uncharted 3 earlier.
Fantastic.
But like it, and you can read about this in Blood, Sweat, and Pixels. Like, there was shakeup, and they had to very much retool what that game was as a result.
Huge, yeah.
And it, it certainly probably delayed the game a year or two or something as a result. So, this coupled with just BioWare's string of issues in recent years, obviously Anthem, had big problems and
I forgot
not recovered from
Anthem.
Anthem. Andromeda before that was problematic. Before that, I even think back to they had a game in development that they showed off at early PS4 stuff, I want to say, that was seemingly trying to jump on that like asynchronous multiplayer 4v1 kind of gameplay. I don't remember the name of it, Shadowbringers or something like Shadowbringers was that was the WoW thing that just came out, I think. It was like Shadow Walker, I don't know. But it was like a 4v1 kind of game that like was in development for a little while and then got squashed, basically. Like, they canceled the project. And so like they haven't had a certifiable like success probably since 2014 with Dragon Age Inquisition. And they're another studio that like we've seen countless issues come out about bad project management and crunch culture and somehow accidentally failing upward, like people at the studio secretly wishing that Dragon Age Inquisition would have failed, so like the pain that they put into would cause somebody to re-examine things over at that studio. It didn't, and then we saw stuff like Anthem and Mass Effect Andromeda happen, and they probably succeeded well enough financially that like the studio obviously continues on, and EA hasn't drastically shaken things up over there. But yeah, from a like these two being there were like what a lot of people were holding their hats on for, like, okay, Mass Effect can still be good and Dragon Age can still be good, and with them gone, that leaves everything kind of in a state of unknown.
It's, again, I think a lot of similarities can be pinned to Amy Hennig leaving Naughty Dog, and the, especially in terms of the surprising, like, shock nature of that, where that just hit, and it was like, oh my god, like, what does this mean for not just Naughty Dog, but Uncharted in particular? Weirdly enough, I think in BioWare's case, at least for Mass Effect, the bar is a little bit lower just because Andromeda was weird. I mean, you could take back BioWare's issues to like the Mass Effect 3 ending too. And the fact that they're kind of going to do like the Legacy Collection, like remaster of these 3 games, as long as they don't, botch that, and they shouldn't just remaster the 3 games. Just give people, that's basically all that people want.
Yeah.
And that'll make people happy. That'll give you some kind of ground will, and then you have to make assuming you're going to make a Mass Effect game after that, just make it. The bar is literally just make it better than Andromeda. If you make the game more fun than Andromeda, people will be happy, and you can kind of build off from there. Dragon's Age is one for me that's almost a more interesting one, because that, if anything, is now the bigger series out of the 2 of them. And so there's more potential for people to be kind of upset. I feel like that fan base is like one who's maybe I can't even say on the smaller side, they're a huge fan base, but they're very passionate. But I also think that, to my knowledge, there hasn't really been any Dragon Age kind of mishaps in the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest controversy in Dragon Age was probably people didn't like the direction that Dragon Age 2 took after Dragon Age Origins. And then, because Dragon Age Origins was, very much RPG, whereas Dragon Age 2 leaned way more into like the action RPG elements of it. And so people were like, we don't really like that gameplay. And so Dragon Age Inquisition kind of brought it back to Origins, which a lot of people were happy with. So yeah, like Dragon Age Inquisition has left people probably on a better note than Mass Effect Andromeda. I would still argue that in mindshare, Mass Effect is probably a massively bigger franchise, just because like you see Mass Effect compared to stuff like Star Wars, whereas Dragon Age is never like in the conversation with like Lord of the Rings or something like that. The people probably gravitate more to the space-based stuff of Mass Effect. So I would imagine it is still infinitely a bigger IP for BioWare and EA than Dragon Age is. But yeah, Dragon Age probably has had a more consistently like happy run from its player base versus the outrage over the end of Mass Effect 3 or Andromeda after that.
Before we shift topics into the shoutouts real quick, because I've been distracted all day. Trevor, what shirt are you wearing? Show the video listeners here. What is this?
This is the kind of funny anime shirt. I don't. It's.
I love it.
It's an Andy Cortez design from a few years back, I want to say. So
go support that. That's a fucking incredible shirt.
Yeah.
So hopping into the shoutouts, we get 3 this week. We're all about this. We have 4. I lied. 4. We have 4 shoutouts this week. It's a big shoutout week.
And Trevor, so I don't know necessarily. Like, I want to bridge the gap in between all the news around these departures or promotions, and the shoutouts, because like literally right before we sat down to record, Halo just kind of released their big dump of their creative director, their new creative director, Joseph Staten, coming in basically with a like, here's the state of the game. We've pushed it to fall 2021. That's that is our new timeline. And he kind of did like an intro piece. I'll include like the write up in the shoutouts here as well. But yeah, he in the same vein of kind of these big like top down kind of shakeups. Him coming in, he kind of talks about his lineage with having come from Bungie and working on a lot of the original Halos to now being back with the franchise at 343 and his excitement for the game. But yes, it needed a lot of polishing, and so there's a whole deep dive into a lot of people behind the game as well, talking about the different aspects that they've been working on since kind of their July reveal that got a bunch of backlash and stuff and caused some shakeup. So that's just another like it was too breaking for us to really include it maybe in the big topic stuff here, but getting a shout out there as well. Again, just like it seems very much in line with a lot of what we've already talked about.
Also, the Prince of Persia game got delayed as well.
Oh, did it? I hadn't seen that.
Yes, I saw that floating on Twitter right before we started recording as well. I think their part of their thing was like, 2020's been a hell of a year, man.
Yeah.
And so
They delayed Scott Pilgrim yesterday into 2020 into January.
All the delays.
I was
this
like,
is a delay
I was
episode.
like, no. But
I never
fine.
played Scott Pilgrim. I'm very excited for that.
It's real good, and it has online co-op, so I know how much you love hopping in for co-op stuff. So
I do. Okay, that's very exciting.
We'll look at that in January.
The actual shout-outs, Trevor, you have the first one here involving Activision Blizzard. That is just a shout-out almost to yourself, but nonetheless, go.
Yeah, so I pulled this in because there was a news story that broke this week. Activision Blizzard suing Netflix over Poached Exec. So I'm more curious about this than anything because this is oh crap, what was his name now? Stephen Newman, I think. Is that right? Spencer Newman.
The tweet.
Yeah, so Spencer Newman was he was the former CFO of Blizzard at Activision Blizzard. He was summarily fired at the end of 2018, and then immediately appeared at Netflix as their CFO. And so, like, it was pretty clear then that he was fired because Netflix poached him. So he was being fired for breach of contract or something like that. So the fact that like it has taken them 2 years to get around to suing Netflix for that is very confusing to me. But yeah, I wanted to like, I remember like that story kind of breaking at the time being like, this is really weird for like at this level at these large of a companies for this kind of like degree of poaching to happen. And then a month or like 2 months after it happened, Activision Blizzard had a ton of layoffs at the same time that they were reporting like record revenue on like a sales call or something like that. And so I wanted to pull in a tweet here that I had from February 12th, 2019. Best wishes to those affected by the Activision Blizzard layoffs, and fuck Spencer Newman as their former CFO who jumped ship to Netflix, and fuck Dennis Durkin for taking the $15 million in bonuses when he returned to the CFO role a month ago. So yeah, fuck that level of corporate like grossness.
Bullshittery.
And what the hell's going on that it took them 2 years to like, the situation hasn't changed in 2 years. They knew then that like he had been poached by Netflix. That's why they fired him, presumably. So it's weird that like it's just coming out now that they're suing Netflix over this.
Yeah, I think for me too, it's just gross corporate bullshit. And so, fuck that noise. My shout out is a fun one though. And it is basically, let's do the fun one first. Anyway, Call of Duty Warzone, Trevor.
We're back after a minor crash. Because there's going to be some weird edit there in the video version of things.
Technical difficulties, everyone, but we're back. Call of Duty Warzone's got a new map. The internet tried to keep me from spreading the word, but it won't happen. No, I'm very excited about it. Obviously, as like that nerdy site's resident Call of Duty Warzone editor, yeah, it makes me happy, right? People have been asking about it for literally years at this point. It's going to be based off of Rebirth Island. And it's one for me where obviously Warzone is kind of the game I play with like the boys back in Missouri who play like 3 or 4 games a year. They were all super excited. They couldn't believe it, some of them. So it's kind of funny to see their reactions and just jump into something new. I'm curious to see how much different it's going to be, both in terms of layout and in terms of geographic landmarks, in terms of kind of what we're going to see in terms of snow or mountains or lakes or rivers, that kind of stuff. But we're getting a new map. It's going to be exciting. It comes out very soon. It comes out, I think, almost exactly a week from today, the 16th, which would be 1 week from when you're listening to this. And so it's just an exciting thing. It's a quick shout out. Warzone stuff is happening. And it gives me yet another reason to, even though I can play it on Warzone proper, to actually get Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War and play it in 2 hours probably, and then bring you that good Black Ops Cold War thoughts. But that's the first shout out. The other shout out was just what in the hell is going on with Spider-Man 3, Trevor? Like all of the news broke today as of recording this. Like, it felt like everything just went bananas today about that movie. And let me tell you what, I have mixed thoughts, but am cautiously optimistic, I will say.
Yeah, I think the news that broke today, for anybody who's listening to this like well after the fact or whatever, is first it was that Alfred Molina was going to be back as Doc Ock, obviously made famous from the Sam Raimi Spider-Man 2, and then shortly after that, some of the articles were updating to say that Kirsten Dunst, Andrew Garfield, and Tobey Maguire were all going to be back as well,
and Emma Stone.
Oh, I hadn't seen Emma Stone.
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely seems like they're going full into Spider-Verse mode on Spider-Man 3, which was certainly potentially teased at the end of Spider-Man Far From Home with J.K. Simmons popping back up as J. Jonah Jameson, albeit in a different appearance, different look. And then we'd previously gotten reports that Jamie Foxx was going to be back as Electro.
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely seems like they're going all in on that idea. I agree. I'm cautiously optimistic about it, in that the people they're bringing back are all like talented, great people. So with the MCU backing behind them, and the magic that they've put into making so many of those stories well, leaves me hoping that things are in good hands. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see kind of how all those actors kind of come back to their respective roles, be it in this, potentially alternate universe kind of take on those characters.
I think one of the weird things for me that I saw somebody mention on Twitter, and I can't remember who it was the fact that Tom Holland has never really had a chance just to be Spider-Man. He's always kind of been a part of like a larger thing, whether obviously even in his first Spider-Man role, where he came in as part of Civil War, and then his first standalone movie very much had an influence of Tony Stark there and Iron Man, and that kind of trickled over with Far From Home, where it was kind of dealing with the aftermath of Endgame and everything. And so it is weird to think about the fact that we've never really just gotten like, what is a Tom Holland Spider-Man just doing by himself? But that very much will not be what this movie is. It's going to be lots of people. I could definitely see them doing something where like Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire come in late in the movie, like very late, like maybe at the end, and like they're not actually in it that much. I wouldn't be surprised by that. I do think it's likely that we're going to get some sort of like Sinister Six-esque plot, maybe. But it's a weird decision. I'm curious to see how it is going to shake out and work out, especially because, a little bit like James Bond, all three of these actors, Spider-Man and Peter Parker's, are so different. Mm-hmm. Like none of them are really the same at all. That I'll be very curious to see how they kind of gel together in the same movie. And like, obviously it can work, see, Into the Spider-Verse, but it doesn't necessarily mean it will work. And this doesn't have the advantage of being an animated film where maybe those kind of different styles can mesh together a little bit nicer. In particular, Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker is miles away from what Tom Holland is doing with his.
And
Andrew
Tobey
Garfield's
Maguire
just,
also
like,
significantly older than he was when he
Yeah.
originally donned the suit.
I mean, Tobey Maguire is, if he's not 40, certainly has to be close to 40 now.
So yeah, maybe he is doing the Peter B. Parker type role from Into the Spider-Verse.
that's what I would imagine, that he is like the older Peter Parker here, and then Andrew Garfield is just like a 30-something Peter, and then Tom Holland. I think it's playing a 19-year-old kid, 18-year-old kid, something like that.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out that despite I will sing Into the Spider-Verse from the rooftops and its praises and all that stuff, like theatrically, it didn't do nearly as well as any other Spider-Man movie ever had. So like there are a ton of Spider-Man fans out there that never saw that. So if they finally are diving into like Spider-Verse territory in live action, it'll still be like a lot of people's first exposure to that type of
concept.
Kind of story. And they did kind of plant the seeds. Ended up being a little bit of a fake out, obviously, from Spider-Man Far From Home, but like the multiverse kind of got a nod, got a mention. So the MCU definitely seems to have been setting up for this, and yeah, it'll be interesting just to see how it plays out.
How they pull up. But the last shout out, Trevor, is one we've already kind of shouted out, but nonetheless, you can go back to it, which is the Hades crunch piece.
So yeah, and that's looking at it. It's actually from it's from over a year ago. September 2019 is when it was written. So it resurfaced. Probably like I saw Jason Schreier kind of retweeting it and pulling out the spotlights. So yeah, it's an old article, but yeah, it got new life this week in the context of the both Hades being awarded. Was it the Washington Post Game of the Year or something like that? Some outlet basically like went out and said Hades is our Game of the Year, and then all it kind of in tandem with all the cyberpunk stuff. People have been talking about this article, so like it when it didn't pop up as like recent stories, and I had to go and dig like into Kotaku. That was the thing that jumped out at me. I was like, oh, this is actually from a year plus ago. But yeah, worth shouting out here because it's a good in-depth interview with kind of the heads behind Supergiant about their work culture.
Yeah. But otherwise, that's a show, everyone. We made it. You can go support us over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite, like all of our amazing and wonderful patrons have. We appreciate all of them tremendously. They keep the lights on, and they make shows like this and like that D+ show, which is a personal favorite of mine, happen. So go, again, over to patreon.com/thatnerdysite. You can check out all of the tiers, all of the goals, milestones, everything. We're constantly kind of recalibrating and fine-tuning those, and that support means the world to us. Otherwise, you can go like, subscribe, and share with your friends on podcast services around the globe. Again, we're in our pursuit to be in the top 300 podcasts in Australia about video games.
See, I like that we do video versions of the podcast now because listeners can just always see me either roll my eyes or shake my head whenever Logan makes that.
We're going to do it!
Sure.
Taking down the Hungry Gamers.
We're not, because I don't think I'm in the categories you suggested at all. The podcast is not in there.
Forget to rate and review us over on iTunes as well. It really does help for newer shows like this. From my own counting, I believe this is the 29th episode of That News You Care About, if I did the math right when I counted. So if that's the case, next week will be episode 30. We'll have a party. Anyway, you can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey all over the internet. Trevor, what do you want to shout out?
This is actually episode 32 of That News You Care About.
32!
So
Hey!
Logan is a few episodes behind, apparently.
I might not have, because I don't know if I counted the Google Docs for episodes I wasn't in. That would make sense.
Yeah, probably.
Trevor, what do you want to shout out?
Shout out to my most recent retro gaming Let's Play of Castlevania. I sat down with that. I talk about in that I've never really been a Castlevania person. My first exposure to it was finally probably Symphony of the Night back in 2015 even, so well late to the game. But it's a series that if I had known that there was a character in there named Trevor, I probably would have gravitated to it much sooner in my life.
Absolutely.
And then in the Let's Play in particular, like it's also just weirdly the game I've been the best at of any of these games, of any of the 11 NES Classic games I've played so far. I definitely make it the furthest through Castlevania. So shout out to that game.
Absolutely. Go check it out. Go check out all of Trevor's Let's Plays. They're all very good. You can go find me at Lefty Logie or Lefty Logie on the internet. I will second Trevor's shoutout as I always do because they're always great. I'll also, again, remind listeners and viewers that Trevor will begin doing the Let's Plays of not Bloodborne, Demon Souls. Maybe starting this week, possibly next week. I don't know when your kind of timeline on that is.
This has been going up. We've part one's
already been going up.
Part 1 is already up. Part 2 will be going up this Thursday.
Don't even listen to me.
Logan's just like weeks behind in time.
I know.
You realize we're in December now, Logan, right?
I'm having a lot of problems here. And then thirdly, I'm not sure if it's up or not yet, but I don't believe it's up. Cameron also has a piece in the works right now that is being edited by, I know Jazz has looked at it, I've looked at it, Trevor's looked at it, I think, ? That is also being worked on as well, and that might be up, but it might also not be up. But stay tuned for that soon.
I've not seen anything come back post-edits, so
okay.
I don't imagine it will be up by the time this episode goes up.
Okay, perfect. It's not up yet, but stay tuned, stay excited for that as well. Maybe one of these days I will crank out the old keyboard and also type up my thoughts on Ghost of Tsushima as well. It's very good. Spoiler alert. Otherwise, you can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site all across the internet, all across the globe. Otherwise, thank you for listening and supporting us through 32 episodes of That News You Care About. And until next time, play your games and be good to each other.